Before we get too far in the weeds today, and we've got a great episode for you, hey, take a moment if you are watching on YouTube and enjoying this podcast with Jon Wilner and I, reach down and hit that subscribe button, make a commitment to us so you don't miss a thing. If you're listening on an audio podcast, on Apple Podcasts or SoundCloud or wherever you get it, also hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything. I'm John Canzano. You can find my work at johncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. Wilner, where do we want to start today? We got a lot to talk about.
Hey, I'm just glad to see you. That one, it sounded like it was a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I was in Indianapolis for the Oregon Penn State Big Ten championship game, and we can talk about that game. The game wasn't nerve-wracking, but the flight home, I had one of those sliding doors moments. You know that Gwyneth Paltrow movie? Great movie, right? I think about that stuff all the time. Like, you know, you make the subway, you don't make the subway. So I had a sliding doors moment. Okay. Tell me what you think about this. I got out of the stadium at 3 a.m. Okay. I finished at 3 a.m. in Indianapolis. They locked the stadium gates. I had to find a way out. You've been in that situation before.
Yep.
You get locked into a stadium. Yeah. And so I get back to my hotel. It's after 3 a.m. I've got a 6:45 a.m. flight. Now, I'm not going to bed, right? Because there's just a point of diminishing returns there where you go to sleep and you're killing yourself. But I had an opportunity to change my flight. My 6:45 a.m. flight connected through Minneapolis, got me back home at about 11 a.m., which would be great for family stuff, youth sports events and stuff like that. So that's why I booked it that way. But I had a chance to take a direct flight that wouldn't leave until almost 1 p.m. that would have got me in at about 4. And I really thought about it. And then I thought, no, let me get home early.
Sure.
Kids are going to be waiting for me, airport, you know. So I kept my original flight, and it bit me, Wilner. I fly to Minneapolis, change planes. I fall asleep on the Minneapolis to Portland leg of the flight. The lady who was sitting next to me happened to be one of the trustees for the University of Oregon. She's sitting next to me. She says, "Oh, I know who you are." I said, "Oh, okay, you're a trustee." Talked about that for a minute. Started to talk about the Pac-12 and all that stuff. But I go to sleep, okay?
Yep.
I wake to her elbowing me, saying to me, "We're landing." And I'm like, "Oh, we're back." And she goes, "No, we're landing in Bismarck, North Dakota." And there's a smell in the air in the cabin of the aircraft of smoke. Apparently, the back of the plane, the flight attendant in the back reported that there was smoke in the back of the plane, and the electronic system on the plane went down. The Wi-Fi went down. There was the plugs and the TVs and everything went black. You know, it was kind of a little nerve-wracking. The pilot's like, "Look, we're gonna stop in Bismarck, North Dakota," because he doesn't like the idea of smoke inside the cabin, right? An electrical issue. So
smart
lands the thing in North Dakota, and I spent about 6 hours in the Bismarck airport with about 150 other passengers. A lot of Duck fans making the trip from Indianapolis through Minneapolis back to Portland. Got stuck in that airport too. Did a lot of bonding, a lot of talking about the CFP.
Well, I bet.
Yeah, it was kind of a private podcast episode that was going on there for about 200 of my close Duck fan friends in that airport. By the way, they love you, Wilner.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
But you know, have you ever had a flight situation? And I got back to Portland eventually after 5 p.m. I would have been better off just taking that direct flight.
Yeah. My goodness.
Yeah.
Was there ever any sense of panic on board?
Not panic, but I always look at the flight attendants when there's an issue, and they looked nervous. They didn't like the smoke. You know, they didn't, you know, it was the smoke, I think, is the thing. The Wi-Fi goes down, the electronics go down. That's one thing. But the smoke in the cabin, you could smell it. You know, it was a little nerve-wracking as you're coming in. But
did they ever say what the problem was?
No, they never did. They got a mechanic on the plane. They just said, "We're replacing the plane." They flew a new plane from Minneapolis later in the day to Bismarck, picked us up, and got us all back home eventually, but never said what the issue was. And then the captains, I never thought about this. The captain and his co-pilot, they stayed in Bismarck. And I was like, you're not flying this new plane. They're like, somebody's going to have to fly that broken plane home after they fix it. So they just left the plane there, and the two pilots are in Bismarck as far as I know. Probably.
Oh man.
Let me get.
Well, glad you got back eventually safe and sound, and here you are doing the podcast. Listen, 24 hours later. So
Yeah, I would love for our viewers and our listeners to get into the comment section and tell us about your nightmare flight experience. Do you have one, Wilner, where you had a dicey one?
Never dicey. Emergency landing in Nova Scotia one time because of gas, but didn't have enough gas to make it back to New York. But it didn't ever seem like it was a big problem. It was just more like a miscalculation. I mean, everything was fine, but that's about it. There's a show on, I think it's Smithsonian Channel, Air Disasters. I watched that with my son, and smoke on a plane, that's like the worst thing, right? So
I tried to reassure the pilot, like, as we're deplaning in Bismarck, I could tell he felt bad, and he was going, I'm sorry, and I just turned to him and I said, hey, you did the right thing. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, yeah, I know I did the right thing, you jackass, but I'm still sorry. I'm still sorry that you're stuck in Bismarck for 6 hours. And by the way, they have a saying in the Bismarck airport. It's, the skies are always blue. And I didn't really get it. I saw it on the wall. I didn't get it until I looked up about 4 hours into my visit. The ceiling is painted with blue skies.
Oh,
so where the skies are always blue, Bismarck, North Dakota. What should we jump into here? I mean, the playoff rankings came out right while I was in the airport. I was texting with you. When I was going down. What were your takeaways?
Well, certainly, in some ways, it was pretty easy for the committee. There was only one spot that was in doubt in terms of who was filling out the field, right? The seeding was another matter, but really it was just down to two teams, Alabama and SMU, for that last spot once Clemson won. And so in that way, probably worked out pretty well for them. And they had they had to figure out the seeds. I thought that the Alabama SMU thing could have some repercussions, could have an impact on how teams schedule in the future. The seeding was real interesting to me, especially with regard to Boise and ASU, because of the home, wouldn't be a home field, but it would be very close to that for ASU. If they had gotten the 3 seed, they would have been sent to the Fiesta Bowl in Glendale for the quarterfinal. Instead, Boise got the 3 seed and is going to Glendale. ASU's got to go play in the Peach Bowl. Now, ASU's not complaining about anything, and they shouldn't be, but playing in the Peach Bowl against Texas or Clemson will be kind of a road environment for ASU, whereas if they had gotten that, they'd somehow leaped Boise for the 3 seed, they would have had a home environment for probably Penn State in the Fiesta.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the Alabama SMU thing. It's going to be interesting. I think there'll be some belly aching about it, of course.
Already is.
And there may be some tweaks to the format because of this. Maybe they'll expand to 14, and then you're going to have a belly aching about who's 15. But the ultimate thing too is with scheduling, I think it would potentially impact non-conference scheduling, but that some of that stuff's done so far in the future that I just wonder if we'll really see that impact before we see other tweaks. And then, television drives so much of what we see in college football. I still think the TV partners are going to come to Alabama and Georgia and Oregon and Ohio State and want those big made for TV payday games that are non-conference games. But, if you are the SEC and the Big Ten and you're talking about this scheduling partnership, why would you want to cross over and play harder games if other conferences aren't doing it? So there's some of that going on. As far as the bracket went, what jumped out at me was just the path that Oregon potentially has as the number 1 seed. It's a tricky path because, you're going to get Ohio State or Tennessee in the Rose Bowl. And if you're Oregon, while those are the 8 and 9 seeds on the bracket, Ohio State was the 6th ranked team in the polls. But because conference champions got, the top 4 buys or top 4 seeds and buys, you end up with some push down lower in the bracket. And I think it really impacts the bracket most significantly with Ohio State because that team should not be the 8 seed. It should be 6 in the real world. So I think that format's going to get attacked. I think there's going to be questions about that, but I also want to pump the brakes a little bit because there's so much belly aching right now. I want to see this thing play out a little bit before we draw a bunch of sweeping conclusions. It's great to talk about, it's great to discuss, but if the seeding holds up and it goes as it should, and the higher seeds win the games, and we may look back and go, hey, there was, that was much ado about nothing.
Yeah, could be for sure. And the conference commissioners are certainly taking a wait and see. And I think there's potential that it will be tweaked even in time for 2020, the 2025 season. I think that Oregon situation is very interesting. And we talked about it last week, and I said how, you can make the case that the 5 seed is better than the 1 seed. And the 5 seed is Texas, and they got Clemson first. And then if they win, they're playing ASU. And they get a home game. They can have some momentum. There's an extra game. There's always potential for injury there. But, Texas is going to have a couple weeks off before they play. I think they have to figure out a way to give the conference champions a greater reward. If you're Oregon and you go on 13-0, you've won the Big Ten, you're the number 1 seed, your reward is you're playing on a neutral field against Ohio State or Tennessee, right? Tennessee's really good too. Both those teams could beat Oregon. I feel like they got to find a way to get the conference champs a home game. Now that could be because the home game is the biggest. That to me, that is the biggest part of this new thing is teams are playing playoff games at home. Oregon should be able to play at home. They got to tweak the format. Now that gets tricky because all of a sudden is the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl and Fiesta, are they part of that? How do you keep them involved? I don't know the answer, but Oregon and Georgia too, they should be able to play at home.
Yeah, maybe you make the semifinal round always a Rose Bowl, on one end of the country, and maybe it's the Sugar Bowl on the other end of the country or whatnot. But I like that, or because you need to really condense the playoff in order to really maximize what that bye means. Because there was some talk in Indianapolis at the Big Ten championship game about whether Oregon would be better off just from a rust standpoint in losing that Big championship game because you're going to play. You're going to play on the 19th or 20th or 21st. You're going to play in the quarterfinal round on January 1 instead of sitting for 24 days and waiting. And, we don't know what that's going to do when, we would normally in a bowl season, the teams that are playing have had an equal amount of rest. So there's a rust factor there that you don't really worry about too much. But I just wonder with 24 days, what does the timing of that do to an offense? And certainly there's an advantage if you're banged up, and there's an advantage that Oregon can sit back right now and can prepare for Ohio State. It can prepare for Tennessee in a way that those two teams can't, but they're still going to get, a great, they're going to get a big window of preparation. There's going to be, I think, 10 or 11 days in there after they play in that opening round.
It certainly is debatable, and it shouldn't be. Oregon's path, Georgia's path should be unquestionably the best. I mean, in the NFL, you're the number 1 seed. You get a bye, and you get 2 home games to reach the Super Bowl. College football playoff needs to tweak so that it is a no-brainer advantage if you're the number 1 or 2 seed.
I love that. I love the idea of a home game and giving an advantage. Let's pick some of these teams in the bracket. Arizona State and Boise State, and SMU to an extent. They become outliers. And I had one university president tell me that what this playoff needs is it needs somebody not in the SEC or the Big Ten to win it or to play for the championship. It needs an outlier to punch its way in there and disrupt a little bit. Who do you give the best chance? Non-SEC, non-Big Ten team, best chance to get to the title game?
To get to the title game, I don't give any of them a chance. But maybe Arizona State. I mean, they'd have to go through Oregon in the semis if they could beat Texas, right? Assuming Texas beats Clemson.
Yeah,
it's just so hard. It's great. The access is great. The fact that there are 3 teams from the western third of the country is great. The fact that Clemson was able to play it, great. You love the access. Bottom line to me is there are still only 4, maybe 5 teams that can win the thing. It is still a small number of teams that can get all the way through, just like it was in the 14 playoff, right? I think it's Oregon, Georgia, if their quarterback's healthy, Notre Dame, which I think is really good, and Ohio State, because Ohio State doesn't have to worry about playing Michigan. To me, those are the only teams that can win the thing, because football, it gets back to, at that level, lines of scrimmage, right? And those teams have the biggest and best players on the lines of scrimmage. And I just don't know how Boise State, SMU, or ASU is going to match up at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, Ashton Genty makes me think about Boise State, but then you look at the bracket and you go, it's Penn State. Let's just assume the high seeds win. It's Penn State, it's Georgia just to get there,
Yeah.
and then Oregon. You know, can Boise State beat that trio of teams? And it's why they're 60-1 to win the thing. And then Arizona State, there may be a, hey, we're just happy to be here type mentality there. But they become awfully interesting to me because I think they could knock somebody out. Would I pick them? Probably not. But could they knock a team out? I think they could. I think Boise could win a game. I think Boise could line up and maybe beat Penn State on a given day. Who knows? We'll talk about that when those games get closer. But I think you're right in that it's a limited group. But I'm going to remove Ohio State from the equation. You can't lose to Michigan the way they lost to Michigan and have me believe in you. Like, I'll look at Oregon. I think Oregon can win this thing. I think Georgia can win this thing. I think you're right about Notre Dame. They could win this thing. But I would be really tempted to put Penn State in front of Ohio State, given how Penn State controlled the line of scrimmage against Oregon. Rushed for 292 yards on the Ducks. I think Oregon, after the game, I saw Tosh Lapoy, the D coordinator, on the field. I walked up to him and congratulated him, and he wasn't jumping around happy. I can tell you, he got on that plane, and I bet he started watching film and going, what happened there? How did we get blown up at the point of attack?
For sure.
Yeah, I think those more physical teams, obviously would be picks. But, Ashton Genty maybe he's the kind of guy that can, he put up 190 on Oregon. They took Oregon to the wire in that game at Autzen Stadium early.
I think
let's see.
I think we'll know early about Ohio State. If they get off to a bad start in the first half against Tennessee, the home crowd will probably start booing, and that could be it. But if Ohio State is up 21-10 at halftime against Tennessee, look out, because they certainly have got the players to win the thing. I am rooted. To me, the most interesting aspect of the whole thing is the home field and the cold weather. I am rooting for a snowstorm right along 40 degrees north latitude. Yeah, I mean, you could have snow in South Bend, Columbus, and State College all the same weekend. That would be fantastic. I think college football has desperately needed that element that the NFL has in its playoff, and it could have a huge impact on the outcomes of those games.
When I was talking to Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner at Big Ten Media Day, he brought that up. He said, playoffs going to happen. You're going to have a game going on in warm weather. You're going to have a game going on with snow on the ground. You asked me, off air, if I thought Oregon could win the thing. They were my pick. If you remember, you go back to our fearless predictions. I picked Oregon to win the thing at the beginning of the year. I'm going to stay with the Ducks right now. We're going to probably look at this as the bracket unfolds and opinions can change, but Oregon's got all the weapons. It's got the offense. It's got the quarterback. It's got enough defense. It's got the coaching. They've got the bye in the first round. The one thing working against them is if Ohio State is up 21-10 at halftime in that game you talked about, and the Buckeyes look like they are locked in and motivated to prove everybody wrong. But I'll pick Oregon. Right now, way too early prediction for the bracket. Who do you like?
Well, I certainly agree with you that this, to me, is a better I won't say better, but the way Oregon has been put together is more likely to succeed in the playoff than the 2010 team or maybe the 2014 team as well. I just, I love their defensive line. I don't know what happened against Penn State, but they have the kind of guys that you see on an SEC defensive line. So they should be able to hold up in the semis and the finals against whoever they're playing. I like Georgia. I have thought Georgia's the best team. We don't know what the situation is with the quarterback. That's the big X factor. But when you look at who could win it, I think it's the team that is best able to generate pressure and disrupt the other team's quarterback. Georgia's edge rushers have really given Texas trouble twice. They got the best, to me, they got the best front seven for generating pressure. And any quarterback, and I don't care if it's Dylan Gabriel or whoever it is, if you pressure them, it can lead to trouble. And I to me, that is what makes Georgia different than everybody else is those edge guys.
Yeah.
They got so many of them.
I don't trust Texas. I think there's something missing at Texas.
They haven't beaten a ranked team all year. Why do we think they're going to win four? Beat four of them.
And in Penn State, I think, there's something missing at Penn State as well. I mean, they've got some elements of a winner, but then they're just lacking in other ways. And you're right about 2010 Oregon and 2014 Oregon. When they got to that BCS title game against Auburn, that first time they almost beat them, but physically they were overmatched at the point of attack. And then Ohio State, outrushed them 3-1 in that game, 2.5-1 in that game. This is an Oregon team that was ranked 22nd in the country against the run all year. They were giving up like 120 yards a game. Suddenly, they had 292 put on them. And all it was, Wilner, was they were running kind of outside zone, mid zone. It wasn't fancy schematic stuff, but I was watching the offensive line because it's evident early, like Penn State ripped off like a 40-yard run almost at the beginning of the game. And I watched the offensive linemen at Penn State. They were jumping around in a way you normally don't see offensive linemen jump around, high-fiving each other. I kind of wondered if James Franklin had challenged those guys from a physicality standpoint and said, hey, you have to win the line of scrimmage today if we're going to win this game. But they did so much else wrong in that game, and Oregon plays so clean.
Yep.
And Gabriel is so calm. I'll take Oregon. I think it's their tournament to lose, and there's a real feel, I can tell you from being on the field after that game. There's a feel about it. With Phil Knight, he's 86.
Yep.
He's watching this thing, and I don't want to say now or never because Oregon could come back in 2 years and be really good, right? But there's an urgency at Oregon right now to get Phil Knight his championship and cross that off. There would be a lot of emotion in that direction, and so I think they will go to the mattresses trying to win this thing for him this year because the window's open.
It is open. Everything seems to be pointing to it being Oregon's year, so we'll see. It should be fun.
Let's pivot to the bowl season.
All right.
First, let's start with a question, philosophical question. Somebody asked me this today. How diminished is the bowl season in your mind? Will you watch games? Will people watch games? Will TV ever give up on the bowl season? Where do you stand on that?
ESPN owns or operates 90% of the 41, 42 games. ESPN owns, operates 90, 95% of them. What else is ESPN putting on at, 9 o'clock Eastern on December 28th, 29th? The bowl games rate well. I think that's going to continue despite the playoff. And they certainly are better than billiards. That's the thing. They're better than billiards for ESPN. So they are going to continue to broadcast the games and go under contract with the bowls. But is it diminished? It is diminished. And the opting out is a big part of it. If the bowls can figure out a way to prevent players from opting out, especially now, because, before if you were going to the Alamo Bowl, which we'll talk about a little later, it still felt like something, but now you're not in the playoff. It feels a little less, and the opt-out frequency might even be higher now.
Yeah, well, in the NIL space, there's room for revenue sharing with players in these bowl games, and I think it's the place where it makes the most sense. I'm looking at some of the bowl games, and I'm going, "Hey, this will be a great game if the two quarterbacks play."
Right.
Washington State's bowl game is a great example of that. If the two starting quarterbacks play in that bowl game, that's a pretty good game.
It is.
And, but can you incentivize it for the players? I think the Bulls are going to have to, otherwise players aren't going to play in it. Portal opens December 9th. If your game is happening 2-3 weeks after that, You've got to create some kind of carrot that you dangle in front of the players. But I agree with you. I'll watch them. I don't care who's playing. I will sit down and watch them. And there's too much money in for TV because the TV companies want to put the games on. But, it kind of, I think the bowl season, yes, it's been diminished, sad in some respects, but coaches are still going to hold up those bowl appearances and bowl victories as evidence of progress. They're always selling. They're going to sell that to their fan base. They're going to sell it to their ADs. They're going to sell it to their recruits.
This also could be a little bit better bowl season because there hasn't been as much coaching turnover. There's a lot of years where you get 10, 12 openings. Those coaches have gone to their new job. So the your team going to a bowl game has got an interim coach, and it just detracts from the whole competitive atmosphere. But this year, there haven't been nearly as many coaching changes. And so that will, I think, help, make the games a little bit more meaningful.
How about this? Just wild idea. What if you said December 9th, the portal opens. Bowls, you can and should pay these players to play in the games. And by the way, if you're a portal player who gets in the portal, you are eligible to play for your new team in the bowl game.
Yeah.
Create a wrinkle there that, adds a little intrigue. If you have a high profile player who's jumped to a new team, hey, let's get a look at this guy. What's he going to be like in the backfield next season? There are some teams that would be like, we don't want this guy in our team, but I think you could plug and play some of these guys, especially if they're going to incentivize it. You have several weeks of practice. It just creates a little bit of intrigue and a little fun wrinkle.
Nothing would surprise me. And that certainly is something that has been in a little bit different form talked about, is letting players transfer once their academic semester or academic quarter is over. You can transfer and enroll and be ready to go for a bowl game after Christmas. We'll see. I mean, the eligibility issue with the NCAA, there are almost no rules anymore. So who knows? We could get to that. It'd be fun.
On that note, which bowl game in your mind is the most interesting bowl game?
If we're just going bowls, no playoff, I really am looking forward to the Alamo Bowl. BYU against Colorado. I mean, First of all, are we sure that Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders are going to play? I mean, Deion said he expects them to play. We shall see. We expect that Deion's going to be on the sideline for Colorado. Black Monday in the NFL is not till early January. But I think that could be a really good game. It's two teams from the Big 12 that tied for the conference title, but didn't play each other. This is a, offshoot of the whole Pac-12 disintegration, but the teams staying with the bowl games. That could be a terrific game, Colorado against BYU. What about you?
For people who don't know, that those Pac-12 bowl games, those former Pac-12 schools are all eligible to play in those bowl games. The respective school in the new conference gets the revenue from it. The Pac-12 will only get the revenue from Washington State's appearance in their bowl game, but it creates a Big 12 matchup that is fun and interesting, compelling. And of course, if everybody plays, it'll be watched. For me, I'm going to go a little different direction. Like, the game that used to be called the Outback Bowl now features Alabama against Michigan. I'm going to call it the Used to Be Bowl. What's it called? the ReliaQuest Bowl, but I'm going to call it the used to be relevant Alabama against used to be relevant Michigan in the used to be Outback Bowl. It's just brand names. It's good brands. It's a bowl game that'll be watched. I think the game happens a little later in the bowl season, so it'll kind of whet our appetite before that quarterfinal round of the playoff. But we'll get those playoff games in right around the 20th of December, and then I think this game comes in right around the 30th or so, 28th, 29th, 30th, right. Something like that. But I just want to see these teams play, and I want to know, they're like everybody else now that got left out. And I think if there's any justice with this 12-team playoff, it's the fact that there's access for some new participants in the postseason, like Boise State and Arizona State, SMU, great examples. And then some of the traditional teams that have hogged this thing are not in it. And
right?
Michigan and Alabama having to go play in a game with everybody wondering, the used to be bowl. That game's interesting to me.
51 weeks after they played a terrific semifinal game, right? And different coaches for both. Things have certainly changed.
Let's pivot to the big Heisman Trophy outlook. Finalists. Who do you expect to be the finalists? And we're not supposed to say what we did with our ballot, but I think if people pay attention in this segment, they may be able to draw some.
They might. Yes. So we both vote, and the Heisman makes you basically formally agree to not disclose your vote until after the ceremony, because they want to maintain some suspense. But I don't know that there's a whole lot of suspense this year. If you go by the Vegas odds, I was looking this morning, Travis Hunter is, I believe, 1-25 to win it. Ashton Genty is second at 10-1, thereabouts. We'll see. I think both of those two will make it to New York. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The question is, who else is going to New York?
I'd throw Dylan Gabriel into the conversation.
Probably.
And when I went to do my ballot, I did weight it towards the teams that won conference championships that were carried by their star players. And so he threw 4 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Oregon's not the number 1 seed without Dylan Gabriel being there, and he's the guy who has engineered it. He's the most important player on that team. Boise State, Ashton Genty, most important player on his team. He's carried his team into the playoff. And to me, I hate that the odds in Vegas have become so much a part of this discussion. And I don't blame you for bringing it up. They put it on the screen during the Boise State UNLV Mountain West Conference game on TV. Here are the odds. Here are the favorites. There are people out there that haven't made up their mind, that don't know what they were going to vote while that game was being played. And I was watching Ashton Genty and going, okay, this is the moment where if I'm going to justify putting him on top of my ballot, that I need to see him have the kind of game that, carries his team to the playoff. And for me, he delivered it, right? He rushes for 200 yards. He has that big, I think the stat on him of having, how many 70-yard runs did he have this season? It was like 5 or 6 or 7 70-yard runs. There are teams that don't have 70-yard plays on offense all season long. And so Genty is just, to me, he should be there. Travis Hunter, what he's doing is remarkable, playing both ways at the level that he's playing. But I have questions about, would Travis Hunter, is he the best defensive back in the country? Is he the best receiver in the country? Or is he just the best two-way player in a game that doesn't allow a lot of guys to play two ways? I think it's awesome what he's doing. He deserves to be at the Downtown Athletic Club. But what do you make of the national pundits and the Vegas odds makers telling us who the finalists are before anybody's cast a ballot?
It happens every year. It's part of the Heisman process. The bigger issue to me is the timing of this whole thing. It has always been a regular season award. You've always had to vote either after the end of the regular season or after the conference championships for the last 20 years, 25 years. But now a quarter of a team's season is the playoff.
Yeah.
Their teams, 12 regular season games, and you could play 4 playoff games. And I do wonder if the Heisman needs to consider delaying the vote, because the postseason is so much bigger, so much of a greater chunk of what we're seeing across the competitive landscape. And also look at Ashton Genty, right? I might be, if he broke Barry Sanders' record, which is arguably the most hallowed record in the entire sport, if he broke that, maybe I'm more interested, and I'm not talking specifically me, but a voter in Chicago or Oxford, Mississippi, might be more apt to vote for him if he breaks Barry Sanders' record, which he could do in a couple of weeks, but you got to vote for the Heisman now. So I just think the timing of the award is such that, and the playoff expansion, they need to reevaluate the whole thing.
Yeah, well, it's lost luster, right? A little bit like the bowl season. That Heisman Award has lost some of the luster. It's a way to bring it back. If you wait until, January, the weekend after the title game, whatever that is, January, third week of January, and you go, hey, we're not going to give it away until we see the whole sample size. Suddenly, you've got Heisman voters watching the playoff and valuing that performance. And if somebody who doesn't make the playoff still wins the damn thing, it says so much about their impact on their team, even though they didn't get to the playoff.
Right.
So I'm with you. I think you move the award back to give it a little more of a little more luster.
Yep. The other two things that are interesting to me about it this year, one, that's, the top two betting favorites, neither of them's a quarterback. Neither of them's from the SEC, and they're both from the West. In fact, you could end up, if it's Gabriel Genti and Hunter in some combination, top three finishers from the West, I'm not sure that has ever happened. Troy Aikman, Rodney Peete, I don't even remember who was third, but it has been an interesting shift in the high end talent to the western third of the country this year. It's refreshing.
Yeah, when you talk about the breakup of the Pac-12, I mean, look at the playoff. You've got Arizona State winning the Big 12. You've got Oregon winning the Big 10. You've got Travis Hunter and Dylan Gabriel in this conversation, at least today, as we're talking about the Heisman. There was nothing ever wrong with the product. We've covered that at length, but it just sort of underscores the absurdity of the Pac-12 being consolidated and parted out to the Big 12 and the Big 10.
We could do an episode or 10 on that.
We will.
But yeah, you're right, and we probably have.
We have.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. There were years when the product wasn't very good, but certainly the last couple, it has been excellent.
Well, it's just the narrative, though, even in the SEC, as these teams were all beating each other and there's 3 losses and debate about who should get in. I was like, we've lived that, Wilner.
Yeah.
Like, we watched the Pac-12 do that, and the conference was criticized, and people said the conference is no good. And now the SEC is being held up as, all that, eat your own. Well, it just means the conference is great and that Kentucky can beat you on a given day. Right. Vanderbilt can win a game. We've lived that. So, and I think our viewers know it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Make sure you subscribe, hit that subscribe button, especially if you're watching us on the YouTube show. And Wilner, we'll be back. Are we coming back next week with another episode? What are we doing?
We are. I believe we are coming back next week. Indeed. Okay. And I'm just glad you are safe and sound and offered some good content for us. So I appreciate that. Good
Anytime I can be here. Look, I've been to Bismarck. Or do you count it if you don't leave the airport? Do you count that?
I have never counted it if you don't leave the airport.
So it didn't count because I was not allowed to leave the airport because I technically didn't have a boarding pass that said Bismarck. So they said, do not go outside of TSA.
Oh, yeah.
And try to come back in. So I looked out the window at Bismarck, though, for about 6 hours. Lovely place, it looks like. Nothing against Bismarck. This podcast
glad it worked out.
Big in Bismarck. All right. We're back next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.